Thank you, Mr. President. Distinguished Senators. My name is Sanusi Lamido Aminu Sanusi, born in Kano, 31st July 1961. Had my early primary education in St. Anne's Primary School, a Catholic school in Kakuri, Kaduna, boarding school. Then went on to King's College, Lagos from 1973 to 77. Read economics at ABU, graduated in 1981, and did my youth service in Gongola State at that time and taught at Federal Government Girls College, Iola. I went back to ABU for my postgraduate studies in 1982, and after the first year, on completion of my master's coursework, started teaching economics at the university at the undergraduate level. 2 years later, I started banking in September 1985, and I've been a banker since then. I started working with Icon Limited Merchant Bankers, a subsidiary of Morgan Guarantee Trust and Baring Brothers, and I started off as a corporate finance and investment banker, and at one time was head of financial advisory services in Icon, in charge of debt conversion, mergers and acquisitions, and other financial advice. I also served as the pioneer credit officer in the Kano office of Kano and as the area manager of the office in Kano. In 1991, I took a break. I went to the Sudan and studied Arabic and did a degree in Sharia and Islamic Studies. And on my return in 1997, came back to United Bank for Africa PLC, joined UBA, which had just been privatized, and started a career in risk management. I was in risk management in UBA until 2005, when I was invited by the board of First Bank to join the board as an executive director and chief risk officer, a position I held until January this year, when I was made the CEO. In the course of the last few years, as my CV shows, I have spent a lot of time developing my risk management skills. I've developed a number of systems. I developed the risk management system in UBA, transformed it in the search for compliance with Basel II.
Colleagues, I agree with the Mr. Sanusi, I want to start first of all by congratulating you for being considered worthy by Mr. President to be sent forward here for this screening. I need to, looking through your CV, I can see that you cut your wisdom teeth in the merchant banking sector of our banking industry. But curiously, today, the fortunes of the banking, merchant banking sector of the banking industry is not doing very well. And in fact, at a point, the Apex Bank had to reintroduce the merchant banks into retail banking. Whereas I know that in other economies, merchant banks are still playing a leading role in pioneering innovations, in leasing, equipment leasing, technology initiatives, development and research. If you are confirmed as a governor of the Central Bank of Nigeria, what initiatives are you going to put in place to ensure that the fortunes of merchant banks are turned around and that they are given the premier role that they play in other economies? That's question number one. Question number two, I have also seen that in addition to your academic orientation and your commitment to your first law of banking, that you are also a man who is deep in issues concerning non-governmental organizations, activities of non-governmental organizations. And one of them, you are listed as the board members of two, but one of them has caught my attention. The one on Kudirat Initiative for Nigerian Democracy. And I'm inclined to ask you, because we know the import of the Kudirat Initiative within the politics of Nigeria, especially in the light of what happened on June 12th and subsequently. Is this Kudirat related to that Kudirat of politics? And therefore, I want to ask you, are you a politician? And are you not going to play politics if you are confirmed for that position? Thank you, Mr. President and distinguished colleagues.
Distinguished Senator Ahmed Lawan.
Mr. Chairman, distinguished colleagues, Ahmed Ibrahim Lawan, I represent Gwamnan. Mr. Chairman, let me join my very good friend, Senator Ayobweze, to congratulate Alhaji Sanusi Lamido Sanusi for the nomination. Mr. Chairman, I have just one single question to ask. The federal government of Nigeria today has the task of ensuring that by 2015, our MDG goals are met. And poverty alleviation is very central and key in this respect. Similarly, the 7-point agenda has wealth creation as an important element in the menu. So, given the obvious fact that 98% or even more of Nigerian farmers are peasant smallholding, also we are aware that the federal government dedicated 200 billion naira support for commercial farming in Nigeria, which incidentally, First Bank is one of those that will be disbursing. And also given the fact that only 20% of that fund is allocated for the 98% of the farmers in Nigeria, that is the peasants. Can you explain to the Senate and indeed Nigerians how this particular policy would create wealth and alleviate poverty among the poor in the rural areas? Thank you very much.
Alhaji Sanusi, I would like you to react to these two questions first. And please react in detail. And if they're not satisfied with your answer, they'll ask you back.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Senator Salmon, thank you very much. Merchant banking or investment banking as a profession obviously has gone through different phases in theory and in practice. If you go back to the United States, after the crash of 1929, the Glass-Steagall Act actually started separating commercial from merchant banking. It was assumed at that time that the major problems faced by commercial banks, that's the deposit-taking banks, was that their assets were built based on the work done by investment bankers who did not take any credit risk. And this is basically how the investment banks have always operated. They structured deals and transactions, and they use the balance sheets of the deposit money banks. Now, there is still an ongoing debate, even now, in the United States, as to what to do with investment banks. Do you merge them into wholesale banks or do you let them stand alone? But the practice is that many of them have disappeared. Merrill Lynch has gone. Goldman Sachs has transformed itself. Lehman Brothers has gone bankrupt. Now, merchant bankers continue to play a very important role in terms of raising large amounts of money through loan syndications, through structuring transactions, and merchant banking or investment banking is critical to the kind of infrastructure power projects that we want in this country. But investment banking has to improve on the quality of skills, and we have to look at the transparency of the products that are offered. The global meltdown that we're facing has been caused principally by investment banks who have designed exotic products that are opaque and complex, which are very difficult to understand, and which escaped the regulation of supervisors. Those were taken off the balance sheet of banks, and they were not properly monitored, and they've come back to hit the bank's balance sheets with a vengeance. One of the things I would like to see is closer supervision. Even in this country, we have a situation where the investment banks are licensed by SEC, and the commercial banks are looked at by the central bank. A lot of what you have in stockbroking companies, financial services companies that are dealing in the stock market, corporate finance activity, that is not under the direct supervision of the central bank. It's critical, in my view, that you have consolidated supervision, that the central bank works closer with SEC and the stock exchange, and look at the activities of these subsidiaries that come back and impact on banks. But the importance of investment banking to the kind of development that we want cannot be understated. And I think the various investment banks we have in the country are doing extremely well at this moment, but they need to be more closely supervised. On KIND, you're right, Honorable Senator. KIND stands for Kudirat Initiative for Nigerian Democracy, and the Kudirat is Kudirat Abiola. KIND was an institution set up by her daughter, Hafsat Abiola, with the objective of helping the poor, defending women's rights, and helping social groups in social society that aim at deepening democracy. She invited me to join the board of KIND because I shared her views about the need to develop a democratic culture in this country, to deepen human rights, and to expand the participation of the people in the electoral process. I am not a politician, but I do believe, as a Nigerian, that we have an interest in contributing to a better society. And KIND and LEAP and all the other NGOs I am part of are NGOs that are committed to creating a better society for this country. I have never joined a political party. I do not intend to join one. But I do not think we can exclude ourselves from politics and from what concerns the people. Senator Ahmed, thank you very much for your question. When you look at the various projects that the central bank has, it's got agric projects that are targeted at small-scale workers, small-scale farmers, agricultural credit guarantee schemes. There are a number of schemes that are targeted at small holdings. Now, this initiative is aimed at large-scale agriculture. From the perspective of the economy, our experience is that small-scale farmers in Nigeria tend to be subsistence farmers. Agricultural productivity is enhanced through investment in capital-intensive agriculture. We've got a lot of land that is not cultivated. The projects that are being financed are not just production. There is a very strong focus on processing. There's strong focus on storage. There's strong process on handling. Now, if you take the tomato farmer in Kura, 80% of his output is lost the moment it leaves the farm from poor handling. It gets destroyed. The investments we're making, or that are going to be made by these loans, are investments in infrastructure that would help preserve that output, that would help develop the markets, and that would help process and add value and therefore create wealth. Non-value added activities do not create wealth. People are able to survive, but they do not create wealth. They remain in poverty. Until we're able to add value through processing, we will not be able to. The large-scale agricultural credit scheme, to my understanding, is something that focuses on production, on storage, on processing, on market development. And with that, we will be able to create more wealth. Thank you.
The DSP.
Mr. Chairman, very distinguished colleagues, I go straight to the issues. You are aware that they are going to face a daunting task as CBN governor if you are confirmed because of the time you are coming, time of great recession. You're also aware that when they had recession in the US in the 30s, one of the approaches at that moment was huge infrastructural development. Now, in our country, we in the parliament, arising from our own understanding of that period, we have suggested through the 2009 budget a huge infrastructural development that will help us to inflate our economy. It doesn't appear to us that the executive thinks that way, because they are saying in some quarters that this will create inflation. As a man that will be charged with managing the economy, you will be kind to tell us your own opinion on this issue of using massive infrastructure to inflate an economy in a recession. We want to know your view on that. Secondly, it appears to me to be a paradox. In some other countries, US, UK, prices are going down, rents are going down. Unfortunately, in Nigeria, prices are going up and rents are going up, and we're all having them all over. Explain to us what appears to be this paradox. The next one is that Labour is agitating for an increase in minimum wage. Now, as a comrade, what's your opinion on the issue of increase in minimum wage at this time? Countries have maintained and sustained a steady exchange rate, and one of such countries is the UAE. The dirham have been exchanged for 3.65 to $1 for the past 20 years. Now, as the central bank governor, if you are confirmed, what is your thinking about how to stabilize our naira and how we can possibly maintain that stability for a long while? Thank you.
Distinguished Senator Sylvester Ayodele Arishe.
Is he ready? He's not ready. He's not ready. I can take this first.
Mr. Chairman, distinguished colleagues, Ayo Arishe Ketinoth, Mr. Sanusi Lamido. I have a few questions for you. The first one, is one, you're a banker, and you're from the commercial banking sector. And your area of specialization is risk management. We have an economy that needs to grow. Now, you as a risk management person, how would you run the central bank to ensure that this economy grows without shrinking? Because one, your major focus will be to reduce the risk as much as possible. And in reducing the risk, the ability for you to develop or to come up with policies that would ensure that the small-scale enterprises who probably don't have this kind of security in court that the bankers do require and ask for are the majority in the population. How, as governor of the central bank, would you look at your major scale as a risk manager to grow and expand this economy? That is the first one. Two, there were a lot of policies that came in the last 5-6 years. Obviously, many of it, as a banker, you might not necessarily agree with. But some of those policies have come out to be...
Comrade Sanusi.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I think a number of questions have come up on the question of my being a former, or my being a bank CEO, and how I'm going to interact with other bank CEOs. I would like to remind the distinguished members that we had Paul Oguma and Joseph Sanusi, who were bank CEOs and who became governors of the central bank. And once they became governors of the central bank, they did not, in fact, I will tell you in public a story of an incident that happened with Chief Sanusi as governor of central bank and Mr. Ajikiwe, my predecessor, as MD of First Bank, after the IIL loan debacle. The bank had a bad loan of 10 billion naira. And the MD was sent to appeal to the governor of central bank, who was his boss, to see if he could give any kind of forbearance to allow the bank to take the provision over 4 years. And he went and met Chief Sanusi. And they'd been working for years. He asked him, and Chief Sanusi's response was, Ajikiwe, I'm surprised at you, that you will come and ask me to do something wrong because it's First Bank. Go and take the provision. The reality is, I've said this at the beginning, if I become governor of central bank and think like MD of First Bank, I am demoting myself. Why should I be an MD? I have moved up. I will no longer be an MD. They will no longer be my colleagues. They are MDs. Now they are my colleagues. I should... Well, as somebody mentioned, if I got confirmed, I'd be the only governor with 4 deputy governors. Now, the second question that's come up is on opening up the sector and creating new banks. You see, I do not want to play to the gallery here and make announcements and make pronouncements. We are facing an economic situation where the priority is to ensure that the 23 banks that we have today survive and become stronger, and we restore confidence in the market. It would be very unwise to start immediately by increasing the number of banks when we have not fixed these ones. Having said that, as a risk manager, I do not believe that every bank, no matter what its business, requires 25 billion. You could have definition of different scales. You have got the microfinance banks, you could have regional banks, you could define different capital adequacy ratios for banks for different levels of operation. Now, that is something that will have to be thought through, that will have to be looked at, but I think that what has been done so far needs to be strengthened, needs to be built upon, and then we can look at all those other areas. If we talk about Islamic banking, for example, you don't need 25 billion to start an Islamic bank. You may have a regional bank. So we've got to look at specialized banks and specialized institutions and see how that can be done. Distinguished Bode Olajumoke, I have never believed Nigeria was immune from crisis. Clearly, even the collapse in oil price is sufficient. What we've seen in the capital market has shown us where we are. Our trading partners have been affected. I think we have been relatively protected by the fact that our economy has not been fully integrated into the world system. Unfortunately, we have had problems compounded by risk management issues and exposure to the capital market by banks. So some of our problems really are self-inflicted, and we can address them and examine them and look at them. But you have a forecast now by the CBN, I think, of growth for the economy at 6%. I believe the IMF has us at 2%. The ADB says 4%. I think 4% is likely, but 4% is still far below the 15% also that we require if we're going to be achieving Vision 2020. So it's really something we've got to look at. The fact that our growth trajectory has taken this beating means that it delays the time frame for achievement of our goals. Senator Ida, I was not defending charges, and I said I would not like to justify them. I think that I understand the components of interest, and we've got to work on those components. If there are any illegal charges, they are not condoned. Today, they're not condoned, and they will not be condoned in the future. The banks themselves have taken a voluntary decision to cap interest rates at 22%. I don't know if they're complying with it. Many banks are. Low interest rates are critical at this point in time, because with excessive interest rates, you constrain borrowing. And if you constrain credit growth, you slow down economic growth. So low interest rates are a priority for economic policy. But these are not rates you achieve by fiat. What happens is, just like in the dollar, you have a black market for loans. If the central bank today says lending rate is capped at 15%, banks will lend at 15%. But you will go and pay a check for 7 or 8% to some subsidiary. They will take that 22%. You will not see it and you will never catch it. So the best thing is to work on market-based solutions so that the interest rates actually come down. And you've got to eliminate the risk, improve the transparency, reduce the cost of doing business, and work on moral suasion. I think in this respect, my relationship with the bank CEOs will be very helpful because I can talk to them. CBN and the banks and public sector deposits. A substantial part of the money supply in the economy comes from monetization of oil revenues. And those oil revenues go to governments. The growth in bank balance sheets to excess of 8 trillion would not have been possible if public sector funds were still kept in the central bank. We've got 36 state governments, you've got countless local governments. I would take public sector deposits as part of the total deposits available to banks, but I would be concerned if a bank had a huge concentration of public sector deposits because of their volatility. So what I would like to do is possibly set guidelines and caps on what percentage of a total bank balance sheet can be funded with public sector deposits so that that individual institution is not exposed to risk as a result of the volatility of those funds. The retail banking bit, I suppose the central bank is the banker to the government, and it chooses for itself at what level it wants to bank the government. And in our economy, the central bank has to resort to some unconventional measures for the control of money supply. Okay, now I'll give you an example. You go to FAC. 50% of the money that comes to the federation account goes to the state governments. Constitutionally, the federal government cannot hold back that money. The central bank cannot stop a state governor from spending or from borrowing and spending. Now, the only way the central bank can have control over money supply is to make use of some of these unconventional measures to keep some money locked in and then free it when necessary. Because if we don't manage liquidity in the system, we have inflation. And if you have runaway inflation, we are back to where we were before 1986. Distinguished Senator Shagaya, I agree with you totally. The central bank does have an investment committee. I think diversification of assets makes a lot of sense. If you keep money in dollars, money in sterling, money in yen, money in other currencies, you clearly mitigate the risk to your earnings of a depreciation in any one currency. On the other hand, you've got to look at the volume of trade and the currency in which invoices are denominated. A lot of the people who sell things to us also demand payment in dollars. So you want to make sure that you don't run so short of dollars that you have to start now selling sterling and buying dollars. But the investment committee does that, and we'll look at that. It's something that I intend to look at very close. But it's an excellent point, and I thank you very much. I'll take note of it. Now, Senator Ghana, I think I've answered the question on consolidation. Senator Smart Adeyemi, I do not know that any bank sets a different target for a young lady from what it sets for a young man. We have targets for officers or for managers or for group heads. Now, because we do not discriminate in employment, we employ men and women. And if we happen to employ a young lady who dresses in a particular way, it's very difficult to tell her, if you give her a target, she goes for a target. I do not condone immorality, but I've heard this over and over again. I am not aware, and I'm yet to be given any evidence of any bank that says to a lady, you have a target that is higher than that of your partner or of your colleague who is a man, because you're a lady. Okay? Now, we do have a general moral problem, because the ladies that go out, the ladies that got, if there's any treasurer that gives money to a lady because she's a lady, then it works both ways. It's not just the bank, it's also the treasurers. But it is something that we keep talking about and we keep preaching in the system, but there's a limit really to how much you can control it. Senator Nwogo, thank you very much. I think I've answered the question on colleagues. On the common accounting year end, even before the first decision to have a common accounting year end, I know that we in First Bank had written and advised that we should have a common year end. It's something I believe in. It's something that happens everywhere. All over the world, the banks have one common year end. It provides for easy comparison. It provides for greater transparency in accounting. It's something I support fully and totally. The final question was, you talked about colleagues about accounting year end. The universal banking. I started by saying that investment banking has gone through different stages, from separating to integration. For me, I think it is not important what model you choose. What is important is to understand the implications of that choice.
Distinguished colleagues, we've had Comrade Sanusi with us for the last 3.5 hours. This is the longest we have had anybody with us. I saw that his date of birth is 1961, so he's a young man. But more importantly, I think being a cynic comrade or not being a total capitalist is not used to soft life. So I'm sure that he's capable of standing a little longer. But by all means, he's been with us here for 3.5 hours. And I think it's only appropriate that we ask him to take a bow and go. We have listened to you very attentively, and by the number of questions that have been asked, I think it's very clear that his presentations have been well above average, and we have shown enough interest in the issues that you have raised. I think those who are not fortunate to have asked questions can interact with you. You allow them an opportunity to interact with you, particularly when you come to your banking committee, so that they can still ask you questions. Is it the wish of the Senate that I ask him to take a bow and go? Thank you. Take a bow now, and you can go.